the president promised to reveal the truth about this. I think this is a big deal. It's based on lying.
Yes.
And lying is the gateway drug to every other sin, of course.
So recently, Tucker Carlson had a conversation about why he believes that the Epstein Files will never come to light. This in response to the recent decision by the DOJ and FBI jointly to say that there never was any client list, despite the fact that Pam Bondi said there was just weeks ago, and why he believes that this has sweeping ramifications in terms of trust from the American people. This is in the context of a discussion with Saagar and Enjeti, and both men weigh in, so let's get their takes on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Can I say one thing that I was brooding about this morning? When the Epstein thing first happened, when he died, and I'll plead ignorance and lack of interest. I was like distracted. There's lots of stuff going on. I get a call from someone I know who I like, who's a true hardcore neocon, many of whom I liked personally, who's writing a book on Epstein. Two people I knew together wrote this book on Epstein. I don't want to name them. I don't want to be mean or anything. But they're like, can we come on your show? We've written a book on Epstein and this whole scandal. So I read the book, and it's very sophisticated. And it's like Epstein's super bad, but the Epstein story is really limited to Epstein, this bad guy who died. And there's no evidence it was part of anything bigger that had anything to do with other countries. And they come on my show and I interview them and they're like, no, yeah, there's all this stuff, mysteries. We couldn't get to the bottom of it. But, Epstein's really, really bad. And looking back, I'm like, that was by design.
Yes.
Right? It was like, wow, we're exposed here. And we need to we need a Warren Commission, actually.
No, you're right. Yeah. Except a real one at this time.
It didn't work because, Vanity Fair, to its great credit, wrote a couple of pieces, then they stopped covering it, I noticed. But they kind of got to the Wexner thing. Who's this Wexner guy?
Who
what
is
this?
Wexner?
And what ties do these guys have to foreign intel services?
Yes.
That's the most pressing question here. The ties that Epstein might have had to a foreign intelligence service or a domestic one. Because if you apply Occam's razor to this case, I'm telling you, it's most likely that he was either a Mossad agent or working with Mossad in some capacity. We know that because of his close relation with Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel, who Saagar pointed out in a different clip in this interview, had close relations with Jeffrey Epstein, visited him more than basically anyone. Ghislaine Maxwell's father was Robert Maxwell, a known Mossad agent, and Les Wexner had ties to the Israeli government too. So his wealth doesn't make sense outside of that context. And Tucker's right. This is really a bipartisan affair. My friend Tom Woods once said, you take the party of stupid and the party of evil, and the two often combine and do things that are both particularly stupid and evil. And that's what we're seeing in the Epstein cover-up.
Which were deep. I mean, I think Ehud Barak lived at Jeffrey Epstein's place off Fifth Avenue.
He flew on his plane 30 times, lived often at his townhouse in Manhattan.
Yes.
At one time, the largest residence in the history of New York City, transferred to him by deed by Leslie Wexner. For what purpose? We have no idea. He invested in Ehud Barak's defense intelligence startup, and I think the defense intelligence part there may be even as interesting as the fact that it's a former Israeli prime minister and former head of Israeli military intelligence. I mean, this is what I'm saying about the money. The money is so important to this story because we already have, documented cases of CIA, Israeli, and others buying up private corporations which pose as, let's say, cybersecurity firms that sell to the government or other governments and use those as backdoors. So, look, if you're Ehud Barak, you've probably met, some of the richest people on the planet. Why do you need, these investments from Jeffrey Epstein, of all people, a tax advisor to the super rich? What did Bill Gates get from his repeated involvement with Jeffrey Epstein? Why did Melinda Gates, divorce Bill Gates after years and of obvious knowledge of his philandering in the past? Are we really to believe it's about philandering, from 20 years ago, which was well known apparently within Microsoft? No, it's because she probably started to get a little aware, or perhaps there was something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Following the money is the key here. That's something that Ian Carroll always talks about when getting to the bottom of, a controversy. You have to follow the money and seek the truth. Well, I'm glad Saagar has all this insight, but he's right. Wexner essentially gave his property to Jeffrey Epstein. He gave him power of attorney, funneled hundreds of hundreds of millions of dollars into Epstein's coffers for no apparent reason other than, he was really good at doing Wexner's taxes. That's the background here. So it's not even clear how Epstein amassed the total amount of wealth he had, and he was known to be a billionaire. Philandering and talking to and associating with the most powerful people in the world. Multiple residences, his own island, Little St. James. We all know about that one now. And just all of this wrapped up in this sex trafficking ring that stretched to the highest levels of government and culture. And we're supposed to just believe and buy the DOJ and FBI's line now that, there were never any client lists. There's no evidence of any clients. Ghislaine Maxwell rots in prison, on evidence that she sex trafficked to no one, they're claiming. I would love to see the jury's notes from her conviction. So, yeah, this is where we're at right now, and the Americans are just supposed to buy it hook, line, and sinker.
Going on there as to the extent of what that relationship was. And, the fact is even from public reporting, we're told that Jeffrey Epstein was seen by Gates as the conduit to win the Nobel Peace Prize. How? For what purpose? How does he have all of these ends with the highest level of the intelligence or the scientific community? And then, of course, it doesn't take a genius to see the intertwinement between the scientific community, the academic research industrial complex, and the intelligence community. So all of these pieces, this is the unfortunate part. And, even returning, like you said, to him being killed himself, or him allegedly killing himself. Let's not forget Michael Baden, who I think is a very authoritative figure. He reviewed all of the documents, the autopsy, etc. He said this is not a case of suicide.
I've talked to him about it.
Yes, and it's like, let's remember. He's one of the most, probably the most famous forensic,
pathologist.
Yeah, pathologist in America, and his research has been his diagnosis has been very important in a lot of other previous cases, which turned out to be true. And so when he looks at this and we have that evidence, when we have the cover up here now at the government, I'm appalled, that this is happening at the highest level. But my only conclusion is just to return is it's just a signal to the court is don't worry about it. We've got you. The people don't matter in this case.
Man, I think this, for a bunch of reasons, it's so obvious. It is salacious. People have followed it for years. The president promised to reveal the truth about this. Pam Bondi, as you said, went on television and said, we have the truth and we're going to give it to you.
Yes.
I think this is a big deal.
Yeah, this is a big deal. I think there's a silver lining here. It's hard to even say that, but there is the chance in all this duplicity and all this evil and treachery and disgusting mentality in government, there is a chance that people will awaken to the madness once and for all now, if they haven't already, because of the COVID regime and all the war propaganda and all the bailout propaganda and CARES Act propaganda and all that nonsense that Americans have been forced to endure. If there's nothing that can get you to distrust government more, it's the clear concealment of a giant, global, world-centered trafficking ring, sex trafficking ring. That's the thing maybe that can awaken Americans. And Saagar's right. Michael Baden's one of the most respected forensic pathologists in the world. He might be the most now. I think Warner Spitz used to be, but he passed away recently. But Michael Baden is well known. And yeah, he concluded that, this wasn't consistent with a suicide, especially relating to a particular bone in Epstein's body, by my understanding, that broke. That doesn't usually break during hanging, but it does break during strangulation. So that's what we're dealing with. That's not been answered at all. There's no narrative to explain that away that I've seen, just from the DOJ and FBI. Nothing. There's no evidence that he engaged in blackmail, which I think the FBI actually at least implied in the past. There's no client list, which Pam Bondi said existed and were on her desk. All this stuff's absurd. Eddie killed himself, something that Kash Patel, again, denied before he got into office. It just screams cover-up. I'm not sure exactly where it's coming from, but there's a cover-up at some level of the government. And this is not unlike the Kennedy assassination in so many ways, I feel like.
It's a really big deal. It's bigger.
So.
I hope so too, actually. So let's just assess this logically. They're covering up. The DOJ, the current DOJ under Pam Bondi is covering up crimes. Very serious crimes by their own description. Why are they doing that?
Yeah.
So there are really only two potential explanations that I can think of. Maybe you've got another. The first is that Trump is involved, that, Trump is on the list, that they've got tape of Trump doing something awful. I don't believe that for two reasons. One, I've talked to Trump about it a lot, and I know him. He's not that, for whatever his sins. I don't think he's that guy, actually. I don't think he likes creepy sex stuff. That's just my view. But more, I think, convincing is that this is all information that the Biden administration had. And if there was evidence that Trump had been involved in illegal sexual activity, you think the people who made up Russiagate wouldn't have leaked it?
Right.
Come on now.
Yeah, I think that there's actually some truth to that. Whatever you think about Trump, and I do blame him for this atrocity that is this cover-up, I tend to agree with Tucker here. Now, the first argument wasn't as convincing, but the second one is more. The deep state did want Trump's head on a silver platter. We know that from Russiagate. There was precedent for it. They almost got him convicted after impeaching him because of it. And this nonsense dragged out for years. So I do buy that. But why I buy it more that he's not directly involved is he wasn't on any of the flight logs to Little St. James. Now, he was on flight logs that went elsewhere where there weren't, these illicit activities, apparently. And he broke all contact with Epstein by all accounts sometime in the mid-2000s. And what seemed to have spurred that from my research is the fact that the two were vying for the same illustrious property in, I think, the Tampa area in Florida. And both of the two had a bidding war, and this was a giant bidding war over this property. And eventually Trump won, and the two seem to have severed all ties. There's no evidence to my knowledge that he ever, hung out with Epstein after that. And you guys know me, I'm a pretty big Trump critic. I'd be telling you the truth if I knew it, but that's what I see so far. So I had to mostly agree with Tucker here. Just don't really buy the first argument quite as much as his second.
So the only other explanation that I can think of, again, maybe you've got another, is that intel services are at the very center of this story, U.S. and Israeli.
Bingo. That's a bingo. That's the most likely scenario. If you're someone that uses reason, someone that uses logic, applies Occam's razor, that seems to make the most sense given how much wealth he had, how many connections he had to people related specifically to the Israeli government and Mossad in the case of Robert Maxwell. I think that's very likely. I stopped short of saying that that's categorically true, but it really seems the most likely. So, hopefully we get more evidence on that someday. So hopefully a whistleblower comes forward about that. I think that is the biggest potential to really blow the cover off this story. A whistleblower of the kind like Snowden was, a true hero from the inside that exposed this sham for what it was and, told journalists the truth and was slandered for it, and his life was ruined for it. He's in exile now. He can't come back to the U.S. In some ways, he benefits largely from speeches and he's made a lot of wealth, but, he can't come back to his home country, and there's something to be said for that that's priceless, and I hope we free Snowden someday. I hope there's a whistleblower of that kind in the Epstein case.
And they're being protected. I think that seems like the most plausible.
That's the most obvious. I have a history of this. There have been multiple documented cases of pedophilia inside of the CIA perpetrated by CIA officers, documented that in many of those cases, I believe over a dozen cases, this was a BuzzFeed news piece years back, where the CIA specifically did not want to prosecute those individuals in federal court for fear that they would reveal sources and methods if they were pulled into open court. And they basically just made it go away. The only time they actually prosecuted somebody for child pornography was whenever he'd already being prosecuted for mishandling classified information.
Well, when they want to crush you, they put kiddie porn in your computer. It's why I don't have a computer. Don't own one.
Yeah, if you're an important person, you should be careful.
No computer in my house.
This is an important thing, though, is that we already have documented cases of them covering this up.
Yeah, there's entrapment from the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. Remember that in Michigan? These guys were tricked into participating in that plot when it wasn't even driven by them. They were recruited by FBI agents to do that. We know this kind of entrapment scheme exists, and these kind of schemes to ruin people's lives.
I believe the CIA Inspector General, I forget the exact quote, but he said something along the lines of, you wouldn't even believe the amount of child porn, that I've seen while I'm on this job. I mean, these are depraved. Look, I mean, it's a large organization, a small percentage of the U.S., we can make that argument. I think there is like something pathological, kind of in the minds of the people who excel in this type of environment.
Of course, it's based on lying.
Yes.
And lying is the gateway drug to every other sin, of course. And the veil of secrecy that protects CIA up to and including its budget, which we can't know, makes all kinds of really evil behavior possible. In fact, it inspires it. If you had the cloak of invisibility, would that improve or degrade your behavior?
Yes. Everyone knows.
Serious.
Everyone knows the answer to that.
No, of course, you'd be like, I'm invisible. At some point, you're going to have to go up and go like, like you couldn't.
Well, and they see.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, the CIA has been engaged in duplicity for as long as it's existed, basically. It launched regime change operations in the 1950s, first with Iran in 1953. Ironic that's the case, given what's happened recently there. And Guatemala in 1954, Allen Dulles even arranged for the Bay of Pigs fiasco to try to drive Kennedy to support regime change in Cuba, but knowing that Americans would die there, but thinking that that would be the impetus to push Kennedy over the edge and support it. So not only regime change, but psychological operations, MK Ultra, mind control experiments, Operation Mockingbird, which again, this sounds like conspiracy theory stuff, but this is documented due to declassified documents. Read about Operation Mockingbird. This was an attempt to basically poison the well in the news media and make the government basically direct the news media to print whatever it wanted, especially during controversial subjects such as the Vietnam War and such. This is the lineage of the CIA. This is its legacy. And we need to do away with it. We just need to abolish the CIA.
Doesn't make you a better person.
They see their own colleagues getting away with it, and it's a permission structure. And so, look, I mean, that's a small case, but it just shows us that it's obvious, and it's something that has been in multiple intelligence communities have been ensnared in this. Again, I highly recommend Daryl Cooper's episode on the entire Epstein saga, because I didn't know about this case in Northern Ireland.
Am I allowed to listen to that?
Oh, right.
I was incredibly informed by Mark Levin that he was a Holocaust denier.
Absolutely. I love Daryl Cooper. I couldn't agree more with Saagar. I think he has a 3-part episode on the Epstein case, and that's a great substitute for Whitney Webb's great book, One Nation Under Blackmail, which is the other best resource on this subject. But Daryl Cooper's 3-part series is great too. Highly recommended. Could not agree with Saagar more. Daryl's fantastic on everything he does, so I agree with Saagar.
Oh, I mean, words are supposed to have meaning, and
but can I ask about the neocons who are, I mean, keep in mind that it was Jay Lefkowitz, who's Bill Kristol's lawyer, who represented the Weekly Standard when I worked there, who was an Epstein lawyer.
Yeah.
And so, like, where's Mark Levin on Epstein? I noticed that all these very voluble people who do not hesitate before imposing their opinions on the rest of us suddenly don't have very strong opinions about Epstein. What is that?
Every accusation is actually an admission. And
but why is Mark Levin covering for Epstein? That's weird.
That's a great question. And in particular, when he's going to accuse you of being funded by the Qatari government.
That's so ironic, isn't it? That this new psyop is to pretend that Qatar has more influence in the U.S. government than any other foreign entity, including that one particular country within the Middle East that shall not be named, Israel. Mark Levin does not talk about Epstein, presumably because, he thinks that will get him in trouble, I believe, because of Epstein's potential associations with Israel. And we all know Mark Levin is Israel first. So are many of the other neocons. They want to do what Israel wants, shower Netanyahu with praises, double down on the genocide in Gaza, just do whatever he wants, and it's just criminal. So that's what we're seeing here, and then a lot of the neocons have been pretty silent on this.
And
if only.
Right. That's what I mean about the accusation is the admission.
Qatari government.
The accusation, they could concoct all these wild schemes about how Steve Witkoff or me or you or anybody else is funded by the state of Qatar, when in reality, I mean, as you know, it's like you guys want to talk about foreign funding?
Well,
let's go. Let's take a look at your C3s and release all of the data.
Wild.
I would be happy to take a look at it for you.
Especially Qatar. I found out last night at dinner you went to high school in Qatar.
Yes, I did. Yeah, they love to use that one. I went to high school, my last 2 years, American School of Doha. By the way, I don't think the Qatari government likes me very much because I've talked quite a bit about how a lot of migrant laborers are abused there. But of course, they still find that tenuous connection as some sort of, admission. Supposedly I'm funded. The only people who fund me are my business and the people who are premium subscribers, which is great. And that's part of the reason I can speak the way that I am. I literally dare them to disclose their donors and those ties to the Israeli government and the Israel lobby. I dare them to do it, and they never will, or any of the other foreign governments that directly prop them up.
Isn't that the ultimate irony here? You talk about Qatari influencing government. The whole Russiagate hoax was based on the notion that, Trump was a secret Russian agent collaborating with Putin to influence the U.S. in the direction that Russia would prefer. All this foreign influence, when the truth is the Israel lobby is the only foreign lobby of its kind in the United States that doesn't have to register under FARA like any other foreign lobby. That is in all the politicians' pockets that we know from Massey. They assign a particular guy, an AIPAC guy, to individual congressmen such that they're kept in line. That the deep state echoes this too. Trump boasts about how close he is to Israel. And we're just supposed to pretend that, no, that doesn't matter. Only the Qatari connection matters. It's just baloney. And I'm so glad that these two can, sift through that and dispose of it immediately, laugh about it for the sham and absurdity that it is.
And this brings us to Epstein. Why, the Leslie Wexner Foundation under Jeffrey Epstein paid Ehud Barak $2.3 million to write 2 papers. I believe he did not even finish the second one. This is a nonprofit funnel, of money.
Really?
What's going on with that?
Can I get that gig?
Yeah, that sounds like a great gig. For anybody out there who's struggling with their bills, money is easy, okay? Whenever you're willing to engage in a lot of very sketchy behavior. And this is a pattern I've noticed all across Washington, is that they ignore strategically the Epstein story because it's inconvenient. And it's not even really inconvenient. I think it's just so deeply enmeshed here. And I just bring it back to Alex Acosta. He told us the truth once, or not us, he told them the truth once in sworn testimony. He belonged to intelligence. And
Yeah, he not only said that Epstein belonged to intelligence, and that's why he went easy on him, gave him that sweetheart deal that allowed him to basically have work release. He could basically go wherever he wanted. At one point, they basically gave him a wing of the sheriff's department to run as his own residence. They even built a special television for him and allowed him to bring in guests with suits. And he was able to walk out, go between property to property. But Acosta also said, and that was when the mask dropped, is when he said Epstein was part of intelligence. He also said that he's above my pay grade. I was told he was above my pay grade. You can look this up. I'm not making this up. But I think the beans were spilled. He said the quiet part out loud one time, and we can't let the regime forget that.
Maxwell, who we have all of these documented ties to Mossad and to the intelligence community and all these sketchy dealings. And then his daughter working with Epstein. We have the Wexner Foundation, which we know is highly involved in Zionist interests here in the United States of America. We have Epstein as well, who's been linked to some of these organizations, or at least through funneling money via the Wexner Foundation. We know about his past, with money laundering. For what purpose? That is the crux of the intelligence community's ability to move things around and to pay for extremely off the books activity. It traces back to the lying, as you said. That's part of why we can't have the truth around.
Yeah, follow the money and you'll get the answers. I'm with Saagar and Tucker on this one. There's pretty much nothing they said that I really disagreed with, except for maybe one of the reasonings that Tucker brought up as to his belief that Trump wasn't directly involved. I thought his other argument in that direction was much more persuasive, but here's where we're at. They all think we're stupid. The men behind the curtain are laughing at us, scheming and plotting and chuckling about whether they'll buy this or not. Well, I don't. And I think the only thing that will keep this story around is the people continuing to clamor about it. We're in a new age of independent media where it's not as easy to just get, all of the news filtered through your favorite talking head at MSNBC or Fox News or CNN, or even the news print media that existed prior to those. We're in a new age now. They can't just sweep this under the rug and expect Americans to just swallow it wholesale. Some of them will. Some people with a blue pill perspective will pretend, government, for all its wrongdoing, is mostly a good force that acts in a misguided way. But the red pillars among us see through that facade and see the evil that lurks behind the government, especially in situations such like this, where they're covering up a sex trafficking ring that involved the highest levels of government, the highest, lobbyists around, the biggest lawyers in the world, the most wealthy people imaginable in this whole thing. And, if they get away with this, they're pretty much going to get away with anything else. Any other kind of propaganda they can just apply and shove down our throats. And precedent will be there for us to accept it, and accept if we make noise. And that's why I'm talking so much about Epstein lately. That's why Tucker is. That's why Candace is, Dave Smith. People are keeping this around for good reason. This is an important story, and there needs to be a solution here. But I do want to hear from you on this. Do you think Tucker and Saagar are correct? Was Epstein Mossad? Is there any other explanations you can think of? And was Trump involved in this whole ring at all? Let me know in the comments below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please subscribe to Tucker too. His show's great, especially lately. He's had great guests on. And also please consider supporting me as a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You can support the channel, which goes a long way. And you also get access by doing that to all my videos in advance of their release live on YouTube to the general public. Until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.